action. Welcome to the Captains and Coaches podcast. My name is Tex McQuilkin, and I am joined by Tyler Melee Minton. Tyler's a former UFC fighter turned weight-cutting coach for both some of the biggest names in the UFC and some awesome NFL players. He is the founder of Ethos Nutrition and the host of the coming soon Truth Serum podcast. In this conversation, we explore the dangers of weight class sports and how to effectively cut, especially for high school athletes, to make sure the wrestling teams are doing this properly to put their athletes in the best position to succeed and win once they hit their target goal. We also speak to his working with professional football players and the impact of a coach, the responsibility that he has to these athletes to ensure they're able to perform once they do hit their weight goals. It's not just a matter of getting the athletes to a weight on the scale. It's how they perform once they get to that target weight. Tyler does an amazing job speaking to the responsibility that a coach has for not only an athlete's performance, but also their health. Which leads me to news that keeps coming across my desk from Tufts University, a Division III school in Boston that is a perennial powerhouse when it comes to the sport of lacrosse. They have 50 guys on their squad, and recently they had a volunteer captain's practice, I'm using air quotes there, where 50 athletes participated. 12 out of that 50 got rhabdomyolysis from a 45-minute workout. 5 of those athletes are still in the hospital at the time of this recording. This workout, one coach was there. He was present. He was a volunteer coach. He's a former athlete, graduate of the program that also graduated from BUD/S training for the Navy SEALs, a program designed to weed you out mental toughness and a ton of volume. So he is a great athlete playing at Tufts, then turned Navy SEAL, BUD/S training successfully. So he's a great athlete. He's mentally tough. And now he volunteers his time. The coaching staff allowed a former athlete to volunteer their time to put them through this. There's a lot that can go wrong, that did go wrong with this situation, this scenario. So what is tough to this individual is extremely tough for the team. So he may have assumed, hey, this is going to be easy for them, or I'm not sure what he was thinking, where he went in with targeting, hey, we're going to target mental toughness for this team, these individuals. He then applied an amount of work that caused rhabdomyolysis in nearly 20%, not one athlete, 20% of the participants here. If you don't know what a rhabdo is, basically your muscles break down, your body urinates them out of your body, and it could lead to kidney failure, seizures, and even death in extreme cases. So yeah, T's and P's, thoughts and prayers to the athletes going through that. But how this is broken down, you had 50 athletes and one coach. That scenario in itself is a recipe for disaster. Then you're applying a workout that the coach, who's not a strength and conditioning professional, he's just a great athlete that's going to go on and join the Navy SEALs. He passed his BUD/S training. So now he took what was easy for him and he's going to apply it to his athletes. No bueno. He can take that enthusiasm with an appropriate program and then encourage and push. But that's the importance of following a quality program, targeted volume, targeted intensity that leads to specific adaptations from those imposed stresses, those imposed demands. So I do want to call that out. Hopefully more comes to light from this scenario. So I do want to say to the coach, hey, I was that same enthusiastic professional that did not know, that took on the responsibilities of strength and conditioning for my team. I injured an athlete, but then I took responsibility and I took that to heart, and I found seasoned professionals and experts in the world of strength and conditioning and athletic performance, and I learned from them. So that was 2009 that occurred for me. So I've been there, man. And now it's ownership, it's responsibility, and seeing the damage that you did, and then finding wherever it was in that workout that was too much for them, because 20% of people with the same injury, the same instance, that's far too many. If you're looking to learn how to program for athletes, well then I have a program for you where you can apply it. It's called Captains, Speed, Strength, and Swagger, where we work on the athletic development and also confidence development. Every single day has a leadership script, so if an individual athlete is following it, they can start to personally develop and maybe take these scripts into their huddles so they can develop their voice, or follow it and lead it as a team. I got a number of teams that are taking the training, applying it, and then the coach is helping to develop leadership through the scripts while there is a targeted volume and intensity for the team to develop athletically. Enough of my soapbox. If you want to check out that program, click the link in the show notes, Captains, Speed, Strength, and Swagger. All right, now let's hand it off to Tyler for another episode of the Captains and Coaches Podcast. Ready.
Welcome to another episode of the Captains and Coaches Podcast, coming to you live from my home. And I'm welcoming guest Tyler Minton, longtime friend, pal. Welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. It's my first time in this part of Texas, so it's cool to stay with a local and get to see the cool parts, and as well as downtown Austin.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little different than I expected, but from the rest of Texas, but I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad to be talking with you.
Yeah, man. The hill country is something else. So I welcome. We're going to go to Salt Lake Barbecue after the show. We're going to work up a little appetite. And I was excited for when you reached out and to get you on the show, because there's so many different perspectives that you can share with the team, because you have been a professional athlete and now you're working with professional athletes in a team setting, in individual, in fight, in professional football. So a lot of different avenues and aspects that we can learn from. So there's so much that we want to pull into your experience to share with our audience here. So I want to start with your professional career. I know you were a high school football player, and then you stepped into the arena. So when did combat sports enter into your life? And then what was the guiding factor there to continue to pursue beyond just the high school?
Yeah, to be honest, I wasn't a great football player. I worked hard, and if you talk to my coaches, I still see my old high school coaches, they talk about how I just notably worked harder than a lot of the other kids. My coach actually told me this story. He remembers last week when I saw him, he was talking about how sometimes, games are Fridays, but sometimes he would come by Saturday to maybe like watch film or do something, and he would see me on the field carrying like slosh pops or sandbags or flipping tires, because I recognized early on that I just wasn't naturally good. And you can't, if you're not an athlete at age 16, 17, 18, you're not just going to wake up an athlete. It's not going to happen. But I can work harder. I recognized that. So that was my only chance of getting better. So that's what I did. Mm-hmm. So I was doing those things. Then I started wrestling later in school because honestly, I dealt with bullies. I got picked on quite a bit. I wasn't a fit kid either until wrestling. And something about wrestling just became addictive for me. And I've been kind of thinking about it more recently and realizing what that is. I would get anxiety on a football team. So if I'm on the line, I played tight end, defensive end, I would get anxiety about performance as it relates to everyone else on the team. I was so terrified of letting someone down. Like I would get honestly anxiety if the ball was running my way, because I don't want to miss a block. There was just something about that defense. It didn't seem to be that way. I was like, I want to get a tackle, but I just got so much anxiety when it came to that. But something about wrestling, I had more fun. I felt more aggressive. I felt more free. And I think it's just because I had less anxiety knowing that if I lost, I just lost. Mm-hmm. And if I won, I won. I just felt like no one else relied on me. And I think that freed me up. And then after high school, obviously I wasn't good enough to go to like college for football. I wasn't even good enough to go to college for wrestling. Like I talked to a few, but nothing that would have given me like a good enough scholarship to make it worthwhile. But I needed something to scratch that itch. So I was working out at a gym that had some wrestling mats, and I saw some guys out of the corner of my eye doing what I thought was wrestling. So I asked if I could join in. I went in. At that time, I thought they were just shooting takedowns.
I think, is this the plot of Fight Club?
That's right. It's about what it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't talk about it if it was. So I remember I was like, yeah, they said, yeah, you can work in. I just pulled my stuff off and was ready to go. And I took a guy down and he just starts choking me with his legs. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I thought they were wrestlers. He's like, it's called a triangle choke. Like, that's weird, but okay. It's like, can you teach me that? And I just started kind of working with them, and I was showing them some wrestling stuff. They were showing me some jiu-jitsu stuff, and they invited me to the MMA gym to come train just as a way to kind of have something to do to scratch the itch of still like wanting to wrestle.
Yeah.
And within, I guess, 2 months of training, they asked if I wanted to fight. I was like, sure. I never intended to, but I'll try. I won my first fight in 12 seconds. So I didn't feel like that really scratched the itch.
Where were you living in?
I was living in Johnson City, Tennessee. Okay. It was illegal in Tennessee. So we have to go to these like National Guard armories in Kentucky. My first like 3 or 4 fights were in National Guard armories in Kentucky. Yes, you can imagine. And back then,
well, how far has the sport come, right?
Oh yeah. And back then you would just go weigh, and they would just find someone else who weighed around the same, and you wouldn't even know, you wouldn't get their name. You would have no idea who you were going to fight.
Yeah.
And then you would weigh in, and then you would fight a couple hours later. And it was wild times. I remember
not knowing anything about them.
No, nothing. I mean, you just hoped it wasn't a promoter's buddy and this guy wasn't like 20-0, but you had no idea. So I go in there, and I just remember me and this guy, like, he signals to touch hands, and I go to touch hands, and as soon as I go to touch hands, he just shoots in on me. And he did that, and I grabbed a guillotine and sprawled at the same time. And when I did it, like, knocked him out. So I'm like, okay, I win. But it just that didn't really scratch the itch because it felt like nothing happened. And then
football gave you more anxiety than this moment?
Yes, something about it. It just never did. And then my second fight, I decided I would fight again. I won in like 30 or 40 seconds with a triangle choke. Remember, I got the guy, triangle choked me, picked me up and slammed me, but I held on, and then he picked me up again and fell asleep. And then my third fight, I got a concussion in round 1. I gave my guy a concussion in round 2. Neither of us remember round 3, and we just slugged and just blood everywhere, just sloppy. And it was something about after that fight, when I watched it, because I don't remember much about it, I was like, yeah, I love this. And the rest is history. It became something that everything I did was to become a full-time fighter. And yeah, I don't even know what it was, the psychology behind it, but something about fighting I just loved.
Yeah. And then now you're working specifically with a lot of nutrition and weight management for these professionals, which in the world of fighting, that's everything you miss.
Yeah.
And your payday's gone.
Yeah.
And then now some awesome NFL dudes, which is cool. So then, like, speak to the connection, why you became connected to weight management. Was that due to your career?
Yeah. So that first fight, like I said, it was same day weigh-ins. And even as a wrestler, I didn't really cut weight. Like, I was a smaller guy for the weight class because I just took advantage of being the smaller guy who didn't have to cut weight. But they told me, because again, this is coaches, especially then, early, or I guess 2009. Yeah, 2009. Coaches then knew nothing about weight cutting. They most still don't. But they were like, oh, yeah, you how much do you weigh? And honestly, I didn't know. I was like, I'm probably like 190. Like, oh, you'll be a 170. Okay. Like, I don't know what that means. Like how I'm supposed to get there. And the fight was going to be in like a month. And I was actually 200 pounds. I just assumed I was 190. I didn't realize I'd gotten up to 200 because I didn't weigh. I didn't check myself.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting to be anything, and here I was 200 pounds, but I agreed to this fight at 170. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to tell them. I'm going to do it. And I remember I was able to diet down to 190, but then I'm 190 on like Monday, weigh-ins or Saturday. So I cut from 190 to 170. Just awful. I just starved. I didn't eat. There was 3 days I didn't eat. I quit drinking water for literally 2 days, which is just, you're on the verge of death.
Yeah.
You weigh in and then you have just a few hours to fight. And so what I didn't tell you, because I was going to bring it up, and it is the perfect question for this. After I win, they raise my hand and my knees buckle because I'm so weak. I have nothing. I'm like, but I made weight, so I just knew that, I need to do something different. So by the second fight, I at least knew I needed to walk lighter.
Yeah.
So I was walking about 190 pounds then. I just lost weight and but still, so then I go to cut from I lost down to about 185 during the few week camp. So then I had to cut from like 185 to 170, and it was no easier whatsoever. Like it might have even been harder. Like it just, no difference. And then I just noticed that I was able to make weight. Like I would be walking lighter and I could still make weight, but like it shouldn't suck this bad. And everyone just kept saying, it's just part of it. And I mean, you would lose sleep the night before because you're like in a sauna all night. And I knew enough about the human body. I was always like a science guy, an anatomy and physiology guy. And I'm like, man, it can't be good to be missing a night of sleep to make weight that you're not having time to recover for. And then I guess it was by my third or fourth fight, I don't remember, they had 24-hour weigh-ins. So you at least had that.
Yeah.
So then, you still have the horrible weight cut, but you don't really know what to do to rehydrate to get back up. So then it's just you eat everything you can, because that's just the normal thought process. And it's still a pretty normal thought process. And it wasn't until, I guess, towards the start of my professional career, I had a weight cut that I got so sick during it. I thought I was going to die. I remember telling my friend, like, I think I might die. Can you?
And you were your own coach at this point?
Yeah. At this point, no one knew anything. Like Mike Dolce was kind of like the first one to make a business of weight cutting, and he wasn't really widely known. Like you didn't really know his methods. He just worked with some UFC guys.
Right. And
so,
I mean, that's the same for a lot of practices.
Yeah.
Where a coach hops on the coattails of a successful athlete, and then he gets opportunities because of that athlete's success. And a lot of reason they succeed in spite of the training that coach provides.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was one of these things. I just knew something wasn't right. And I after that weight cut where I really felt like I was going to die, and then I still had, I made weight and I fought, like something's got to give. So I decided I was going to change my degree. I was going to school. I was pre-chiropractic, but I didn't really want to be a chiropractor. I just didn't know what I wanted to make money, and I wanted to do something in that realm, in the sports.
Well, you're used to manipulating people.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
That was it. And so I'm like, I'm going to switch to nutrition. So I switched to nutrition thinking that was going to give me the answers, and it doesn't.
No.
That gave me the answers to dealing with a sick population. So it was after some time of fighting and nutrition, I reached out to Rob Wolf, who I had met at a CrossFit nutrition seminar, and I sought his help, and he resisted for a long time. He didn't want to help me. And he'll say it's because he has a saying, no good deed goes unpunished. And he said anytime he had tried to like mentor people in the past, it bit him in the butt. So, but I kept on, and I annoyed him until he figured, well, I'll at least give it a shot, so he'll shut up. And I took everything he said to heart, and he was talking more on the lines of recovery than he was nutrition. So I started really diving into the importance of sleep, recovery, and then I started doing my own research on electrolytes and, antidiuretic hormones and all these things that make you sweat or make you hold sweat. And I started then looking more into what I could find on what like Mike Dolce was doing. And I just started kind of putting together my own thought processes and my own, ideas of weight cutting as it relates to anatomy and physiology. And, pretty soon my weight cuts were easy. I was doing like Facebook videos of me in a sauna eating M&Ms and stuff while I'm like cutting. And, the person would be like, oh, how much weight are you cutting? I'm like, I have like 15 pounds. I'm like, well, how long is that going to take? And I knew the process I developed. I'd been practicing it. I'm like, 15 pounds, yeah, I'll make it in like 3 to 4 hours. Like while I'm eating peanut M&Ms and stuff. And I just kind of got known for making really big weight cuts easy myself. So then people started asking for help, started helping some friends. Some of those friends got into the UFC. I was just helping them for free because they were my friends. And I remember to this day when like a top UFC athlete called me and asked how much it would cost to hire me. I was like, well, I'll have to draw up a business, I'll draw up a proposition for you and I'll let you know. Can you give me 24 hours? Yeah, I hung up the phone. I was like, I better create a business plan because this isn't a business. I don't charge anything. Like it wasn't a business. It was just something I did for fun and for free for friends to help them. And I happened to be good at.
Yeah.
So I made it a business. He had a great weight cut. And within 1 year, I was working with 3 UFC champions and all 3 of them kind of came out publicly saying it was the best weight cut of their life. So,
So let's speak to that process. When do you get tapped in to start the cut? Is it 6 weeks? Is it 8 weeks? How long is a normal camp and a cut involved in that?
It depends on the fight. Usually a camp is anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. Even if a fighter gets notified in 12 weeks, they don't want to start until 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes it can be a short notice one, but 6 to 8 is your general time frame. The problem is fighters don't believe in what would be called a 52-week fight camp, and that means you're prepared year round to where then you don't have to make extreme changes.
Right.
What most people don't realize, most fighters, even at the highest level, when they're not in camp, they're not doing anything that looks, they might go train, but their diet's not remotely healthy. They're not worried about their weight. And in fact, one problem is if you take a fighter and you help them make weight really easy, they just get more confident they can be heavier the next time. And that becomes a problem. So periodization is not a real thing with most fighters, and that becomes a problem. So it really just depends, and you just have to update based off of who you've got and what you've got. And I will say now that I don't want to say I'm on my way out the door with fighting, but I priced myself out of working with a lot of fighters simply because I have a wife and kids. Like I can't work for the small amount of money to go live with people like I used to. I used to go live 6-8 weeks at a time with athletes and cook their food. That way I knew what it was and then do everything. Very concierge. And I couldn't do that anymore. So I priced myself out of a lot. And then the UFC PI came in and they offer free services for people. So then it became a lot of people in my position started getting upset and nervous. Well, the PI is going to push us out. I'm like, no, they aren't. Like, there's still going to be people who want the concierge service. Right. And sure enough, they did. And that was fine. So it allowed me to increase my rates, work with far fewer athletes. I got to be more picky about the athletes. And therefore, I'm going to pick the athletes who treat this like a profession and they live the life year round. So that made that far easier.
Yeah. And then how involved with you were like the training? Did you partake in the training with them? Did you observe the training? Because a lot of strength coaches are tasked with observing practice. So then you can manage all the stuff that you do in the weight room based off of how intense practice is.
Yeah, like I said earlier, when it came to football, I was never naturally good, but I always knew that hard work would make me better. And one thing about me is I'm tough. Like anyone who goes back and watches old fights, they're never like, dude, Tyler was a really good fighter. They're like, holy smokes, he was tough. And I would beat a lot of guys just because I was tougher. My toughness was greater than their conditioning, and they would get tired, and then I got better.
Yeah.
So a lot of the fighters I would be working with would recognize that in themselves. And I was a professional fighter. So I would end up, it wasn't supposed to be, but I would end up becoming a training partner. And I remember at the time, Daniel Cormier preparing for John Jones. And Daniel Cormier is a light heavyweight, and I'm a welterweight. But
for our listeners, how much is a welterweight?
A welterweight is 170 pounds, which means at the time I was walking between 190 and 200 pounds because I wasn't in any kind of camp of my own.
And then how much was DC?
At that time, probably in 230s. And DC,
Doing math in my head.
oh
here.
yeah, oh yeah. And I'm not a UFC, I'm not at his level, but DC is known for hurting training partners because it's the AKA way. They just train really hard. That being said, DC knows that he is a tough training partner, so he pays his training partners well. Like he makes sure that they, he appreciates them. But he was breaking a lot of them, like mentally and physically, just breaking training partners. So I remember at that point, my only job in camp, like I'm holding the water in between rounds. I'm giving him his water, which was water and electrolytes and dextrose and thin things. But like I just started noticing, and I offered, I was like, hey, if you ever want me to spar, I can spar. And I remember he kind of laughed. It's like, oh yeah, okay. Well, just kind of stick to the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay. But then I started noticing that guys just started getting really hesitant to go in within a few weeks of training camp. It's like, all right, it's your round. And they're over there like fiddling, putting their gloves on really slow and doing all this stuff. Like, okay, I'm gonna offer again. Still just kind of laughed. Well, then he gets a guy. I don't remember if he hits him, kicks him, whatever, but the guy's like done. He goes out and they need someone and no one's volunteering to go in. And these guys, it's their job. Like you're a training partner, but they're either hurt or they're just barely wanting to go in. I'm like, I'm going. And so I just go glove up. And I remember they look at me and I'm like, are you sure? I was like, yeah. I'm thinking, no. But what's the worst they can do? Chances are you're not going to kill me. People don't really die from MMA injuries. The worst you can do is knock me out. And I've never been knocked out, so I don't think you're going to do that. So all this is going to do is hurt for 5 minutes. I can deal with hurt. So I went in there and I hurt for 5 minutes. But out of all these guys that were far better than me, the one thing I probably did better than them at is I just kept coming.
Yeah.
Like he's hitting me, kicking me, taking me down. I just keep buzzing forward because I know that the only way I can help him get better is to go as hard as I possibly can and to keep giving him a body.
Yeah.
Even though I'm just a dummy at that point, but I wanted to help make him better. And after that, I became just a training partner as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean,
mean
it's why I snore now because he broke my nose, but less, for the story. Some things you have to do just for a cool story to tell.
Well, there you go. Yeah. It's like the practice squad, freaking Rudiger just throwing his body around for the glory of the team. That's awesome. What I want to spend a lot of time with is high school wrestling and those practices, right? It's not a 6-8 week camp to cut for. It's a season.
Yeah.
So where are those coaches messing it up that you're aware of that we can aim to educate and change those practices?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. And fortunately, more coaches are trying to fix that. Like I consult with the Indiana University's wrestling team. They brought me out last year. I'll be going back this year. And,
awesome.
And remotely, I work with them because they recognize that there is a huge gap and they want to bring in people, experts who can fix it. And the biggest issue is, again, out of season, there's not really any attention to weight. These guys aren't really doing anything like that. So in season, it's just a season-long weight cut. And what happens with that, again, the body does not care about performance. The body doesn't care about aesthetics. It doesn't care if you have a six-pack. It doesn't care if you win a match. It cares about survival. Mm-hmm. And the more you put it in survival mode, the less it's going to give you for performance and the less it's going to give you for aesthetics. And that's why you tend to see wrestlers start missing weight later in the season that didn't early in the season. Fighters will start missing weight later in their career than they did earlier in their career. And that's because they put themselves in a position where they have these horribly hard weight cuts and they might make it, but especially with wrestling, well, then you're wrestling again the next week. Mm-hmm. And what happens is they starve themselves. They a lot of times they way under drink water because that just makes sense in the head. I need to lose water weight, so I'm going to drink less water, but then I'm going to sweat. Well, the body says, okay, cool. Well, you're putting me in that position. We're not going to sweat, but you keep forcing it.
Yeah.
So you'll squeeze it out eventually. But then what do? They win, and all weekend long they just eat whatever they want because they know come Monday they're back to starving and sweating. And they just repeat that cycle season round. all season, and they're just worn out. I mean, everybody can think of the high school wrestler they went to that was sneaking plastics on under their outfit.
Oh, yeah.
Wearing to sweat. And
as you're saying this, I'm remembering Buddy Nom, who just never shut up, but he was jacked. I don't know how he did. I never went to a match. But then running the track in a sweatsuit wrapped in a plastic bag, and I'm sure he had a plastic bag underneath the sweat.
Yeah. And that's just oh gosh, I just think of those times. And that's just normal. So what I try to help with, especially with wrestlers, I'm like, hey, first off, be a professional. You chose to do this. You have to accept the fact
that's big for a high schooler.
Yes. And
mindset.
It's like you have to understand you don't have to wrestle. You can do anything else. Like I like to joke with them sometimes and just because I consult some high schoolers as well and joke around with them is like, hey, you can go play baseball or something easy. You just say that because you appeal to that wrestler mentality, or go play basketball during wrestling season. It's a lot easier than what you're doing. You might as well. You don't have to cut weight. The girls will actually be there to watch, and but you chose to wrestle. So if you're going to choose to wrestle, choose to do it right.
I like
and get them in that mental position to understand that this is a choice and they can tap out at any moment. But since you chose it, let's do it the right way. And I'll tell them too, and I assume you want to be good at this, and I assume you'd like to go to college for this. So if I'm making those assumptions, I should be able to assume that you're willing to make other sacrifices to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
And once we get them to understand that, we first have to look at, are you even in the right weight class for you? And sometimes people aren't, but most times it is. They they're in an okay weight class, especially by the time you get to high school. The problem is they're not willing to make the lifestyle changes and sacrifices they need for that. And listen, I get it. You're a high schooler. That's the last thing on your mind. But again, you chose it. And wrestling is not for the faint of heart. It's in a lot of ways, I'll argue it's the hardest sport because I'm biased.
Mm-hmm.
But it asks things of you that no other sport asks. None of the other sports in high school, you have to make weight. None of the other sports in high school, you're literally physically beating someone to beat them.
Yeah.
That's how you win. There's a point system based off of how much you are physically manhandling this other human after you just cut weight.
Yeah.
Nothing else asks that of you. So we have to make those lifestyle changes again, or change your sport. And that becomes number one, in the off season, you don't have to be training like crazy. You don't have to restrictively diet. You don't have to be in a calorie deficit year round. In fact, you shouldn't be. You just have to not get heavy in the off season. Just be at a moderate weight within striking zone of your weight class.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the preseason, we can focus on getting a little bit lighter and establish that new maintenance baseline. So then our weight cuts are purely cutting things that are passive weight loss. We can lower our fiber. Fiber holds gut content. We can lower our fiber in the last few days to remove some gut content. We can lower our water in the last 24 hours to remove some of that water. We can cut a couple days worth of carbs to lose the water that's attached to the glycogen that we get when we consume carbs. But we don't have to then do all the crazy work and the sauna suits and all of that. Because if you're forced to lose mass, you can't gain mass in season. You're not going to gain body mass or lean muscle mass during the season. But what we're doing is we're losing that. So by the end of season, guys will actually have higher body fat percentage and less lean body mass than they did at the beginning of season. But if we lose some of the water that was attached to our muscles and in the gut content, we can get most of that back during the rehydration phase. So we only want to lose what we can actually put back on. Yeah. And if we just keep repeating that cycle, we can recover.
That's a key phrase. Yeah, I definitely want to highlight. Mm-hmm. You only want to lose what you can put back on.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were speaking to a high school right now, and then 3 things within a kid's control, what would it be? And more fiber, what would be a simple high school direction as eat this? Because they don't know what the hell fiber is, right? So as an example.
Yeah, your vegetables, your whole grains, the things that are good for you. I mean, the things you should eat. Whole grains, like fruits, vegetables, these things are what you should do. But let's say you're weighing in, I'll say Saturday. Well, those things they should be part of your normal diet from Saturday night until say Wednesday. Those are the bulk of your carbohydrates. And then say around Thursday, we'll lower the carbs a bit, and then we'll switch to low fiber carbohydrates.
Examples
like white bread.
Okay.
Again, it sounds counterproductive. But white bread, people really like those Stinger waffles before working out. Those little waffles, high calorie, things like that. But white bread and honey, like a little sandwich, white bread and honey, do that before you go train. That's
homemade
a good one.
stinger.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh.
Exactly.
I like it.
You know, and those type of things that will give you the carbohydrates, they'll give you the quick energy, but they're lower in fiber. Plenty of lean protein. Be consuming that still on
Examples.
the every few hours. Yeah, you gotta
Turkey.
So turkey, chicken, steak. You know, like lean ground beef, 93.7 ground beef, eggs. These things are still lean proteins. They're okay, and be consuming those like every chance you can. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. You know, pre-training snack. And water intake needs to remain adequate. Like you still need to be consuming enough water. Sometimes we'll water load. That's really just athlete dependent. That's where you raise your water beyond what you would normally increase. You still have to be careful with that though, because too much can put you in a hyponatremic state, which means you're increasing the water volume and it's decreasing the volume of sodium and electrolytes in your blood.
Yeah, I had that in college.
You experienced that?
Drank way too much water.
Did you get the dizziness? Did you see things or just the dizziness, or what part did you hit?
Yeah, seeing things, just way too focused, and it was a road game. But then leaving my college house, we had this porch out front, just all the water's gone.
Yeah.
So then went to the athletic trainer, and it's like, dude, I can't drink any more water. My body won't let me. So then it was like orange, tangerines, fruit, just to try to get something.
Good that they did that.
Yeah.
It's I've seen a lot of coaches cause hyponatremia, and it's awful because what a lot of people don't realize, you drink water, you sweat water with electrolytes attached to it. So like as we're sweating out electrolytes, we're not really replenishing those, then it's a problem. So I'm also big on that, like during practices and even like in the morning and stuff, kids need electrolytes. Like you need to be drinking those because you're going to be sweating those out. Unfortunately, the last couple of days, we can't be putting those in. We're water only.
So this one's for parents. Gatorade before games or competition?
Yeah. And I am like, I have supplements that I prefer. You know, like I'm a big fan of, it's a company called ProTech. They have a product called Hydrate it's electrolyte packets, and I like those. But the fact of the matter is, if someone's not investing in something, like they don't want to get the supplements. A lot of parents aren't comfortable with supplements, or kids are kind of on their own a lot of times. Gatorade has been around for a long time. And it's important to understand that Gatorade is a sports supplement. It was never a drink. Like I promise, the guy who created Gatorade at the University of Florida, if he thought that there would be 4-year-olds walking around drinking Gatorade, he would have never created it.
Yeah.
You know, it was
I remember the commercial. That's why we called it Gatorade.
Yeah.
It's like an accent. But
yeah, it is a sports supplement. It is made to replenish those electrolytes. And I think it's a very good thing for kids to be taking into their wrestling practices.
In line with high school, and then now your experience with college athletics and professional, there's something I want to get into is overtraining or overheating signs, because this happens far too often where we get an overheat or an underhydrated or an overtraining death within college athletics and high school athletics, and even some pro cases.
Yeah. And you know, I don't know if you've heard it, but I mean, I've said it, and it's true to an extent. So, you know, I renege on it a bit, but we say like there's no such thing as overtraining. It's under recovery. And that's true to an extent, but especially in sports like wrestling and fighting, where you have weight cuts, it's like you're essentially always under recovering, because you lose weight by calorie deficit. That means you're consuming less calories than you burn. The more technical name for a calorie deficit is an energy deficit.
Okay.
And what that means is energy maintenance, which is just eating enough calories to maintain weight. You are effectively eating energy, because calories are just a unit of measurement of energy. You're eating energy equal to energy that you're expending, that you're spreading or spending.
Right.
So if I'm in an energy deficit, that's literally eating less energy than you need to perform the tasks you're asking your body to perform. So I'm doing this, and then simultaneously I'm increasing the demand for energy that my body needs to perform the task, because now I'm running more and I'm doing these things. And again, the body chooses survival. So what happens is the body, it's like an aha, gotcha moment. The body's like, okay, cool. Well, if we're not getting enough energy to survive, I'm just going to lower the mechanisms I need to survive. We're going to lower our metabolism. We're going to lower the amount of calories we burn through, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And you're just in this feedback cycle. You feed yourself less, you burn less. And that's why people end up getting to the point where they're starving and they're still not losing weight. It's because their body is burning less calories. And that's where you start to see athletes struggle the most. They're just putting so much effort in, and they start dieting so extreme that the body starts to shut down. And it's scary. I mean, it is if you've been in one of those weight cuts or seen an athlete, especially in a hot place, it's scary for them to know like how close they actually are to death.
Yeah.
Before hopefully someone steps in and fixes it.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And not obsessed over the number versus the
Yeah.
person there. So then with the football side of things, do you feel it's just such a shock change because it's mostly return to play off season, summer workouts. They just didn't treat their bodies too well when they had off. And now we're shocked.
Especially at the high school level.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is that it's maybe they don't play another sport, or maybe they do. But even if, again, I'm not trying to compare the hierarchy of sports. I definitely have my biases and my favorites. But the fact is, football is harder than other sports. Like it's going to be. I would put it up there. Like football and wrestling are more energy demanding sports than a lot of them. They're also higher risk of traumatic brain injury. You're likely sweating more because you're out in the heat. You're training with gear on. So all these factors come into play. And you talk about acclimation, and they've had from the end of the previous season, all the way up until the start of next season, they've not really acclimated to that. Then all of a sudden they jump right in, and no high school coach believes, well, I'm not saying no, but most high school coaches are like, hey guys, like I know that we've taken off the last little bit. We're just going to start really easy into summer training. That's not a thing coaches do. It's like, okay, let's go. You had all season off. We're going to hit this hard. Mm-hmm. And again, they're not acclimated to the heat. They've been maybe eating horribly. Hormones are going crazy. So they're sweating more than normal. And all these things just result in the body being shocked by all of a sudden the demands that it's not had to see in some time.
Yeah. I can speak to the high school level. So when I was in high school, we had a rule change to where in the summer, my high school brought professional strength and conditioning coaches in. So they had professional athletes, and this is in Houston area. So then we had professional strength coaches, former NFL dudes, training us. Yeah. So our school provided this resource, this opportunity for us. And then 2 years in, Texas changed the rules because the dudes would do skills. So we strength, sprint, and do specific skills with our group, the guys, whatever their deal was, defensive back, quarterback, etc. So then Texas had a rule change. If there was a ball in your summer training, that counted as a practice. So then these dudes were no longer like their specialty, even though we lifted and ran, their specialty, they were brought in for the sports specific stuff. Threw it out. So now our high school coaches took over the training or handed it to a senior, a captain, to run the training. And this is where everybody falls to the margin of their experience. We're just running to run, or we're doing 100 repeats and jogging back to the start. Like we're not focusing on speed, technique, or anything. It's a lot of effort, which is fine. However, we're not getting faster. And then the strength, dudes are not as invested because it's the same old ball coach using the same old, MF and techniques to get us going versus somebody to aspire to, and a guy that's like, talking about his freaking awesome car and just the opportunity and presenting that we are better. Like, hey, here's a standard. You have the potential to do this, this, and that at the next level, or whatever the next level may be, even if it's just varsity. So there was a major shift within the off-season training that we had, and then it was clear in the preparation going into two-a-days, because we still had two-a-days back then. But now we see it, and then, just connecting with the coaching local kids here, still involved with football, and it's still the sport coaches leading those groups. And then, unless they're very proactive, they're not as in tune with sprinting technique, weightlifting technique, and then managing a program, creating a plan, and then adjusting the plan. And you know this within a camp, right? We plan the 6 to 8 weeks, but you make adjustments, either forward or backward, depending on the progress. That's coaching. That's leading. Unfortunately, unless they're proactive, a lot of those coaches are just football guys.
Yeah, and you said it a different way, but essentially it's you fall back on your highest level of training or experience, and I, it's not intended, but a lot of people are just going to do what's always been done because it's what they're used to. And it's hard for a coach to be like, number one, most coaches aren't looking at the other. They're looking at, say, football. They're looking at, how can I make my football team better? Well, let's look at offenses. Let's look at defenses. Let's look at special teams. They're not thinking, let's look at nutrition. Let's look at strength and conditioning. Let's look at these things. They're not, because their coaches probably weren't, and to most people, and I do think we're seeing a shift in that, but for most people, it's I know football, so I'm just going to look at every way to get better at football using football. And it takes a lot, even if they are aware of it, and if they're in that pre-contemplation phase, they become aware of it, to say, like, I've been doing things wrong, especially if you've been successful. Like, I've been doing things wrong, or I could do it better. I'm going to change things. That's hard. I remember our football coach, my freshman year was his first year, and it was a team that never had a winning season. My high school never had a winning season. I think it started in 1969. He was fresh out of college football himself, so it was different for him. He was coming in with no, there was no base really, so he could do whatever he wanted. So he came in and kind of changed the game a bit. But it was a bit easier because he had a fresh start.
Yeah.
But then after that, after he established a culture of winning, and you're expected to win, it would be a lot harder to make changes to a program that's already doing better than it was. So I just think there's resistance for change in those sports. And even at the higher levels, like college, it's not there. I thought a lot of these things would change, these things. And then when I started, consulting and working with like NCAA teams, and then pro, like in the NFL, and like working with guys in there, you start to see like some of the same things are being repeated even at the higher levels. There's just a lot of resistance to change when it comes to those.
So, and you're working with a lot of teams and individuals. How would you go about changing those beliefs? Like, we can call them beliefs because science, research, experience is saying otherwise.
Yeah.
How do you speak to the athlete? Do you speak to the coach? What's your approach there?
At the college level, it's not to the athlete. It's the team, because even though, the transfer portal and NIL are kind of changing that dynamic, and negatively to an extent, but it's still your part of the team, and this is your team for 4 years for the most part. So you can't really afford to have individuals doing their own different thing. So like, you hope to inspire a team, and to do that, you really need the coach, because you also can't go to a player and be like, hey, there's a lot of holes in your all's game. Can you go tell your coach I should come out there and talk to him? No, it's not happening. So you got to hope the coaches want that.
Yeah.
At the professional level, say NFL, these guys are their business, and they're not loyal. They're loyal to their team as long as they're on the team. But you better believe if some other team's coming to offer more money, they're probably going to switch to that team. Or if the team that wants them is at least has a better chance of the Super Bowl, they're going to that team. So it is a little bit more self-serving. So you can speak to the athlete more at that point.
Yeah.
And you still have to be careful, because you don't want to cause any waves. Like I've had NFL athletes where maybe my recommendations were different than, say, their team dietitian. but this person's hired me and they can listen to me. They don't have to listen to that one.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to be careful with maybe your language because you don't want your coach, your athlete to go to the team dietitian and be like, oh, no, my guy said that, this isn't the way.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to start to cause any issues and any disrespect. Because again, when it comes time to renegotiate that contract, if they're a difficult player to deal
good way to
with,
put it. Yeah.
yeah, or they might start then putting, whispering in my guy's ear that maybe I'm wrong. So you don't want that. So you're still it's still kind of like a team of us, but part of the overall team. So you have to navigate that a bit, but you do have more control because they expect these guys to have more control of their own careers. So it gets a little bit, it's a little bit easier, but there's still individual challenges with that.
Yeah. Couple more questions here. Last one, and not the last one, but the last normal one in terms of nutrition. Talk to me about hard gainers. So if we're talking to a 16-year-old and they're like, you're a safety, we need a guard. Instead of losing 20, you got to gain 20. How much time do we give them?
20 is a lot. And that is a funny thing. You hear people, I'll get people coming to me with a goal, like, I want to put on 20 pounds of muscle this year. I'm like, well, that ain't happening. Yeah, even with steroids, that ain't happening. You might be able to put on 20 pounds of weight, but and I'm not saying, first off, I'll say, I'm not saying someone should do this. I'm very careful when you're talking with kids or about kids. Like when I'm doing seminars, I'll tell people, for instance, my kid, he's about to be 7. He takes creatine.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get parents and like, should my kid take creatine? I'm like, I don't know what your kid should do. My kid does, and I'm comfortable with my kid doing it, but I'm not going to tell you what you should be comfortable with your kid doing. I will direct you towards the research and tell you to look at that and form your own opinions. Same thing with this recommendation, but the best recommendation I've ever been able to work with kids to help them put on the most amount of weight as quick as possible is the GoMad, gallon of milk a day. It's anabolic. It's so handy. And why I do like that one is it's low volume. So the opposite of losing weight. When we want someone to lose weight, we want low calorie, high volume foods that aren't a lot of calories, but they take up a lot of room. Mm-hmm. We can compare like that from like a couple cups of honey and a tablespoon of honey and a couple cups of blueberries. They might have around the same carbs and calories, but one of them is going to fill you up much more.
Right.
Well, we want to do the opposite when it comes to gaining weight. We want as much calories as possible in as little bit as possible. And usually liquids don't fill you up as much. And also milk is nature's perfect formula for growth. That's literally what it's for. Like if there was another way would have been created or evolved or however you choose to believe. But this was what was designed as, hey, I have this thing, this newborn. It needs to grow as rapidly as possible. What's the solution? Milk. And it's balanced to do that. So whole milk. Whole milk is the fastest growing agents, fertilizer for kids. So that is the one thing, and I've used it many, many times in conjunction with other things, like a peanut butter jelly sandwich before bed. Little things that you just have to get the calories in.
Yeah.
You are going to put on some body fat, but most kids at that age who are in need of gaining weight, they're so lean that even the body fat that they put on, it is not going to put them in like an overweight state. They're not going to be unhealthy from it. But it does it gets tricky. And usually a hard gainer is not, it's not a real thing. It's just whatever their environment or their hunger levels or whatever it is keeps them from consistently eating more calories than they burn. And again, that's where I say it has to be consistent. You see people all the time, like, I eat like crazy. Mm-hmm. But then when you actually start totaling out the calories they eat, they don't eat as much as they think they do over time.
Yeah. When I was at a high school in DC, a private high school, there was a mom that worked for the American Heart Association. So then I basically gave them the meat, protein, fats, carbs breakdown, eat this, not that. And then I got a letter. My AD got a letter about my nutrition information that I sent home with the dudes. So then it was like, all right, I need to have this conversation because she's told one thing based off the American Heart Association that's pushing this info out. And then everything I know about nutrition and performance And I'm looking at the list. It's all real foods and dairy. So it was an interesting conversation. I'm grateful for the AD willing to be a buffer between mom.
Yeah. And it's difficult too, because it's a whole other, you could have a whole podcast just on people's beliefs between the medical community and their nutrition recommendations. But they're honestly, when you really look at it, they're not off. People, the big one is like the food god pyramid. The food god pyramid is a joke and it's designed to make you sick. No, it's not. Take any obese, sick person and ask yourself if they eat the food god pyramid. No, they don't. If they started eating the food god pyramid, which isn't ideal. We now know the food god pyramid that was created several decades ago, it's not ideal. But if the average person were to eat that, they would start losing weight and feeling great, because what's not on the food god pyramid is McDonald's and frappes and alcohol and Coke and all these. But that's a whole other conversation.
It's coming back to me, but I think the mom's biggest gripe was eggs and cholesterol for her 14-year-old son.
Yeah, which we do, I don't know how long ago that was, but now even the dietetics community is recognizing that the cholesterol in eggs doesn't seem to have a direct response to actually blood cholesterol. So that was a belief. And two, when you look at the general recommendations, the general public isn't athletes, and performance is not normal. It's not. And a lot of people don't realize that performance is not, we can expect that from our body, but to expect performance from our body is to expect our body to do things that it's not designed to do. It's not really equipped for. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm not a big supplement person for everyone. But the fact of the matter is, you might have to use supplements because it's unlikely that an athlete is going to get everything they need in whole foods. It's tough. It's very tough, because you're asking your body to exceed, the normal needs and the normal demands. And that is hard. And it gets harder with kids too, because you don't want to ever make kids think they need supplements, because they don't. They can give an edge. And in fact, my whole deal with creatine, I don't like the talk of creatine for what can my kid to take to be bigger and stronger. Well, work out, work out, get enough protein and work out smart. But things like creatine are good for brain health. That's why my son plays football. I'm more concerned about the brain health and the benefits you get from creatine with TBI prevention and recovery. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm big on that. But it gets a little tricky, especially when you are working with a population of people who their parents ultimately buy their groceries and make their decisions. And it's tough. I've had many a parent, question those things, and I've set many a parent down and told them that my recommendations they're not dangerous, but, at the same time, I struggle to understand their concern when at halftime they're bringing their kid Coke.
I have an 8th grader right now. So then just speaking with his mom, just not a meat person, hasn't found his meats. So then that's wiping a lot of my list off. Solution went to just a big tub of protein powder. So then handed that off so now he's starting to see results. Mm-hmm. And the more buy-in he gets from me, it's going to start with a supplement of protein to actually build muscle. Then we can start to break down the meat and the food conversation. So, she's grateful because he's trying that, right? Which is a new food all in itself, which is cool. All right. Winding down, I want to speak to your first year as a coach. You coached yourself for a long time and made adjustments based off your performance and how you were feeling, succeeding, and being competitive. Speak to us about the first time you were responsible. I know it was your friends and you were giving away this stuff for free. Maybe speak to the first time somebody paid you to be responsible for their performance.
Man, it's scary. It is. And I think part of the problem with coaches is they get to a point where it's no longer scary for them. And then at that point, you become callous to the fact that it's a human on the other side of those recommendations. Mm-hmm. Because you got to think of it my recommendations are going to, and my coaching is going to affect this person's ability to make weight, which is their ability to, feed their family and their abilities to get further fights and their health and safety. That's important. You know, that's an important thing. So it's powerful and it was strong. And I would get a lot of anxiety over the job. And I'll say, I know this goes beyond the first year, but I will say as I got better at it and more successful, I noticed I got more comfortable with it. And like I stopped feeling as nervous. And now in the part of my career where I do work with fewer fighters, my risk tolerance has increased again. My risk tolerance is higher because now I know more. I know more, and I know more about the risks. I know more about because I never quit learning myself. And it's still such a new field. And I'll confidently say that I'm one of the ones to really bring the science to weight cutting. You know, there's a lot of people. I said Mike Dolce was the first one to really make it a business and make it an industry. And then you have guys like myself come in and put our own spins on it. And Charles Stoll, he's the UFC Performance Institute's lead dietitian. You got Jordy Sullivan. He handles a lot of the Australian athletes. And we all kind of bounce ideas off each other and what we've found and tips and tricks. And you just learn more. And as you learn more, you see without a shadow of a doubt that there's nothing to brag about helping fighters make huge weight cuts. And in fact, it got to a point where I would get called by fighters to make a huge weight cut because they saw me as the huge weight cut guy that I just started turning them down. I'm like, I can't do it. You know, but next fight, if you call me at this far out at this weight, we can talk. So my risk tolerance started increasing as I just started to recognize the dangers of big weight cuts. And I got to the point now I don't want to work a weight cut if it's going to be a hard weight cut, which sounds crazy, but that's because now I want the athletes that value their career and they value what I can actually bring, which is help me perform better. And those athletes approach it much smarter to the point we don't even have to have a super difficult weight cut. We can just focus on giving them what they need to perform and then how to recover to compete at their best.
Yeah, a lot of good takeaways here. One that jumps out to me that I feel is a valuable lesson is that open source of information, right? You mentioned some other guys within the profession in the field you're bouncing ideas off of to then further and grow, and you're keeping the athlete's well-being ahead of all this. And a lot of coaches in other sports and performance arenas, they want to guard and protect their secrets. So this is the secret sauce, the magic formula. And then that's a detriment to maybe they did have the answer to everything. Now we're neglecting the rest of the community and athletes out there with this information.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I will say that, like I said, there's a team of there's a lot of good people doing what I was one of the earlier ones to do now. There are. But one of the things that I was very passionate about, and I mentioned Charles and Jordy because we were kind of the three that I think did the best job with this. And we still won't talk like I'll have an athlete sometimes that's competing against an athlete they're working with, and we won't discuss those. Like we're not going to discuss the details of our own individual athletes in ways that can give out proprietary information. But when we're not doing that, we will 100% share new findings because ultimately it's we want to impact the profession. I'm not going to be doing weight cuts my entire life, but hopefully one day people see the difference of weight cuts in the UFC and it trickles down to other things, college wrestling, middle school wrestling, high school wrestling, and all of these because I'm passionate about athletes knowing how to cut weight correctly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to see things different. I'm going to have different because every fighter's different. I'm going to have a different experience than others. So we just share our experiences together because, again, we care about the profession more than we just do our own into what we can gain from it as an individual.
Mm-hmm. And that's awesome because it's going to continue to trickle down to the college and then the high school level.
Yes.
That's just how performance work. What happens at the top trickles down, even though it's a little game of telephone.
Yeah.
If we find these awesome benefits, it enters into the college cuts and into the high school. And then we're not just doing what we saw in Vision Quest in 1989.
Exactly. It's such a good film, but man, and that is so true. That happens weekly in MMA rooms.
Yes. So if you haven't seen Vision Quest, check that out. It's got arguably one of the greatest sports pregame speeches of all time. I'm not going to ruin it for anybody, but
yes.
6 minutes.
Yeah.
That's the key. If you hear that queued up on the movie, it's the way to go.
Yep.
Tyler, thanks for coming all the way out to the Hill Country and and this is the first podcast in my home. So if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe, and you see my sister's beautiful art behind us. And are you ready for some barbecue?
I am very ready for some barbecue.
All right. This is not sponsored by Salt Lick, but that's where we're going. All right, dude.
Awesome.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
you, brother.